And so this dynamic that we're talking about today, seeking the truth and speaking the truth, telling those stories of woundedness, airing it out so that there is an opportunity for healing, that is true for us as a nation just as much as it's true for us as individuals. Our nation is badly in need of a character that is willing to seek the truth and speak the truth where there is a racial injustice in our society. And that just has not been done enough. You might think it has been. You might think, well, you know, Pastor Jason, all we have are all of these stories about the Civil War or slavery that have been told over and over again. I mean, why can't we just move on and get past it? But what maybe you don't know is that our nation didn't just commit racial sins around slavery and the Civil War. Our violence against people of color in this country has just continued year after year, decade after decade, era after era, generation after generation, up to this very day. And those stories and the depth of those stories and the truth of those stories has only begun to be told. We have to be a people who are willing to stand up and seek that truth and speak that truth if we're going to be healed as a nation. And this is the church's calling. Nathan's calling of speaking the truth to King David is no less than the church's calling in the world. Unfortunately, the church has too often allied herself with government power and kingly power and nationalistic power and militaristic power, and in so doing, we have abdicated our prophetic calling to be a body, to be a people who are willing to rise up in courage like Nathan did, go to the throne room and say to the king, "You have done wrong." But that is exactly what we are called to do as the church. I love the way Walter Brueggemann puts this in his book called Truth Speaks to Power. He says very plainly and very simply this: power is not free to disregard the truth. And above all, we as Christians are to be people who are people of the truth. And what is the truth that Walter Brueggemann is talking about? Well, he's talking, of course, about truth that comes from God. He's talking about gospel truth, the things that are true, that are beyond our governments, beyond our creeds, beyond our religious practices. Beyond all of that is what is essentially true at the heart of our faith. And that is this. Walter Brueggemann goes on to put it this way. He says, this story, that is the story of the gospel, or the story of God's truth, begins wherever there is enough courage and freedom and daring and sensibility to acknowledge that the pain of ruthless exploitation is not normal and cannot be borne. I love the way he puts that. Because, of course, you could say, I think rightly and accurately, that violence against people of color is the character of America throughout our history. And in that sense, you could say that it is entirely and utterly normal. But what Brueggemann is getting at here is that there is a bigger truth that we are all committed to as followers of Christ. And that truth is this: that violence and exploitation against those who are weak is not normal for humanity made in the image of God. And we can never allow it to be seen as normal. That is a burden that none of us can ever carry. Reminds me of the famous Martin Luther King Jr. quote that you probably saw in your Facebook feed 1,000,000 times last Monday on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, where Martin Luther King Jr. says that I have decided that hate is too great a burden to bear. I have chosen love instead. And that really is the essence of what we're talking about here. Because at the heart of every lie is hatred. And at the heart of every truth is love. Nathan was loving David when he stood before him, summoned his courage, and spoke the truth to him about his sin. That is our job, not just with each other as followers of Christ, not just within our church, as a congregation who is committed to seeking and speaking the truth to power, but it's also our job as a church that stands as a prophetic witness in these United States of America, not allied with Republicans or Democrats, but standing as a prophet before the throne, speaking what is true, no matter what regime is in charge. I'm as glad as any of you that Donald Trump is no longer our president. But Joe Biden has been president now, by my count, for 4 days, and there are still babies in cages in this country. Our role as prophets in this culture and in this society is not to ally ourselves with any partisanship, but to be genuinely prophetic, to say what's true no matter who's in charge, no matter what it costs us. And that will require courage. It's my prayer today that we would all have that courage, whether the healing and the reconciliation we seek is personal between us and another individual, or whether it is corporate and social as we seek to live out our calling to speak the truth to power in this age.